everyone, welcome to episode 2 of the Guatemala Life and Culture podcast. Today, for this episode, we will be talking about where are they from, life in the aldeas and towns in Guatemala. So again, we're going to be continuing this journey in empathy to really immerse ourselves in what life is like in one of these villages in Guatemala. And the first step to that is understanding, where is Guatemala?
Yes.
So Guatemala is in Central America. It's just south of Mexico. So you have the United States, then you have Mexico, then you would have Guatemala. Mm-hmm. And Guatemala geographically is roughly the same size as Ohio, to put that into perspective for people. But when we're talking about our population here in New Philadelphia, Dover, and Massillon, we actually have very specific areas of Guatemala that our neighbors are coming from.
Yes.
So if we were to zoom in to a very small portion of Guatemala, kind of the western part of the country, and if you're watching with us, you can see a red rectangle. If we were to zoom that rectangle in, there's two specific areas where our New Philadelphia and Dover families are coming from. And a lot of our New Philadelphia families are coming from the Ahuacatan or Chesh region. Mm-hmm. And a lot of our Dover families are coming from the Neba, Akul, Sheshushkap region. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that's to do with networking that we will talk about in the future. But it's actually a very specific place where the majority of our neighbors are coming from. And for our population up in Guatemalan population up in Massillon, they're more from the Hoyoba area, which is a little further east from where the Tuscarawas County families are from. When we talk about the community, we're talking about indigenous Mayan Indians that have been in Guatemala for centuries before the Spanish conquistadors arrived.
Yes.
And so even within Guatemala, there is a difference between your Hispanic Guatemalans that have descended from your European ancestors and your indigenous Guatemalans who have descended from the Mayan Indians who have lived in the mountains for that period of time. So about 25% of the adult population in Guatemala is illiterate, but 60% of the indigenous population is illiterate. And we'll get into that in the future, but we're just kind of continuing to lay the foundation here. So only 4 out of 10 children who start primary school in Guatemala finish. And so poverty, people are living on about $1.90 a day. And, that can fluctuate from year to year. But we are recording this in the year 2024.
We are.
And so that's where we are currently. Mm-hmm. So we understand if you're listening to this, you're not going to be able to see the photos or the visuals that we're talking about. But if you are watching this on YouTube, you will be able to see what we're referring to. But if you are listening to it, don't worry. If you click the link in the description of the podcast, you can have access to the visuals that we're referring to. So if when you're finished driving or working out, you want to take a look at those, we encourage you to do so. So the aldea. Aldea is another word for village. And a lot of our families are from these little aldeas that are kind of plotted around these slightly bigger towns. And the way that I would kind of refer to it is the towns would kind of be similar to like a New Philly or a Dover. Mm-hmm. And these aldeas would be kind of like your Midvale or Roswell, Baltic, those sorts of locations, right?
Definitely more rural. Yes.
Much more rural. And you can see from the photos here, it's a very simplistic lifestyle. Dirt floors, wood or brick houses. You have a main street, and then you just have these little pathways, not even roads, but kind of pathways that lead you from house to house. Yeah. And within these aldeas, you really have a true neighborhood. Everyone knows where everybody lives. It's really a community raises the children to an extent. And Don, because they live in such a rural area, do you kind of want to talk about how do they make their living? Where do they get their food?
That's a great question, Jeff. Yeah. So obviously if you live farther from town, unless you have the ability to grow your own food or produce, making a trip into the actual town, larger area would be necessary, maybe once or twice a week. And that could entail taking just a little tuk-tuk car, motor, not really car.
What is a tuk-tuk for those
for those of you who don't know, I'm glad I get to explain this. It's basically like a motorbike, and then there's like a carriage built, not a carriage, but a seated covered area on the back of the motorbike. So it's really just I mean, it could be anywhere from a 2-seater to a 5-seater, how many people you can, get in there at once. But that would be a short, that would be the equivalent to like a little taxi drop off. Not a very far distance would you go in one of those. Or you could take like a bus, but not a bus, like it would be a van, that's called a micro, that
or
you
truck.
Or a
Back
truck,
of a
or you
vegetable
could,
truck.
yeah, definitely a truck. Yeah, many forms of transportation. And that depends on, the village, and location is everything. But yeah, if you, unless you're able to grow your own food, and other than, picking up a few essentials at a store, a tienda in town, in your village, you would have to at least go a little ways just to pick up other essentials.
Absolutely. And, people ask, well, what do they do for jobs?
Mm-hmm.
You're living off a very minimal amount of money per day. And a lot of it's farming.
Yeah.
The milpas, they might own little stores. And if anyone's driven around Tuscarawas County, you've certainly have seen several Guatemalan stores popping up in the area.
Yes.
So that's not unsimilar to life like down in the Aldeas.
It's not uncommon to have many tiendas like on just the next block. That's pretty common.
Yeah, and some people are drivers. They're driving the tuk-tuks, they're driving the micros. There's a handful of things out there, but there's not a lot of opportunity.
Right.
There's, even within a village, there's only so many things that you can do. There's only so much need for things. And so that's why sometimes people will, work in the town, and we'll talk about towns here in a second. But just to kind of continue with the Aldea, if you're in one of the houses, and you can see a video playing right now if you're watching, it's dirt floor, it's an open stove, and you just have, it's almost like being in a cabin in a sense. You have
Very
things,
much, yeah.
Utensils hanging on the walls, and the stoves are fueled by firewood. And when we're talking about climate, I think a lot of people think of Latin America and they think hot, tropical, exotic. But with Guatemala, this is where our families are coming from. It's the mountains.
Yeah.
So we referred to Cortes on the previous episode. They're quite warm. It's to keep you warm. It's not like something that you would necessarily want to wear when it's really hot out.
No.
So our Guatemalan families are used to cooler, temperate weather in the mountains. So that's kind of what you're living in. Obviously, no air conditioning, no heating. You're just kind of at the mercy of the weather. But in my time in the Aldeas, it's usually been cooler, but
And
fairly
rainy,
pleasant.
maybe
And rainy.
cool and rainy.
Muddy.
And yes, muddy, rainy. And because you have this wood burning fire in the kitchen, which is the stove, that's kind of stoked all day long. So that's where you hang out. If the temperature is a little cooler, that's kind of where everyone gathers.
Absolutely. And usually families will live in close proximity to each other in the Aldeas. Again, what we're talking about isn't true for all families or all Guatemalans, but generally speaking, they do have pets. It's not necessarily the way that we treat our pets here in the States, but they have names and they have their dogs and their cats and
kind of more free range.
Free range pets.
Free range pets. Yeah. They come and go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, when we're talking about clothes, you're hand washing those, like we did back in the day here.
Right. Yeah. You've got like a stone, trough, so to speak, or you just, I don't know if we have a video of that in the future, maybe, basically where you're just scrubbing on like a stone surface, and then you've got the water in the tank right next to you or in the same area. So it's just, yeah.
And that reminds me, so actually two things. First thing is I'm always amazed. And when my mom went with me to Guatemala a few years back, she was like, how do they keep their white clothes so white?
Yeah.
Because we just said there's a lot of dust, there's a lot of mud.
It is, yeah.
But they can keep their white clothes spotless. And it's amazing how they can do that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we were talking about washing clothes. Well, how do you wash yourself? How do you bathe? In some houses, you have a shower.
Yes.
And you take the ubiquitous bucket shower where maybe there's not great water pressure and you're just kind of dumping the bucket over yourself.
Right.
But in some cases, in your super traditional homes, you have what's called a
Tamascal.
Tamascal. Yes. And Tamascals were not made for tall people.
They really weren't. No.
So I've had the experience of taking a bath in one Tamascal. And it's basically this, it's a hole in this mini hut, or it could be in the side of the home. And this hut is made of wood and mud, sometimes brick. So it's kind of like walking into an oven.
Yeah,
because
it's
on
like
the
a
inside,
clay-made hut. Yeah.
On the inside, you have a little fire, and it's vented, so you're not going to suffocate.
Correct.
But there's still a lot of smoke in there, and you have the water being heated on the fire. And so I was excited because this would have been like my third or fourth trip, and I had never bathed in a Tamascal before. I'm like, sweet, I'm going to have this super traditional experience. And I quickly realized that it wasn't a great experience because I'm tall. I mean, I'm not super tall. I'm 6 foot. But I go in the Tamascal, and I have to bend over and basically crawl on my knees to get inside. And once I'm inside, there's a little bench, but I can't even sit up straight. I have to really like hunch down over, or else my head's hitting this muddy, sooted roof.
Kind of dome roof. Yeah.
And I'm sweating like a pig, right? It's like only 50 degrees outside, but in there it felt like it was 90.
It is. It's like a spa-like feeling, or that's the temperature that you definitely experience once you're inside this Tamascal.
But not a spa-like experience.
Maybe not. It is more of an earthy. Yeah, you are safe from suffocation, but you definitely have like the cinder smell. And you said it's like a bath. It is a bath, but there's no like, you don't sit in water at any time. Yeah, you have a bench, and then you have the pot of water that's been heated for quite some time. It takes a while. Hot. It takes a while for this to heat up because not to cut off your story, you can finish for sure. But in my experience, first time I went to Guatemala, I learned what this was, but I didn't believe it when the family that I was staying with said, "Oh, that's the Tamascal. That's where you take a bath." I was like, "No, that's where you like cook your bread or something, right?" Because it looks more like a clay oven. But when I asked, because after a day or two of travel, you are ready for a shower. And I asked the grandmother of the family if I could bathe. She said, "Well, I'll get the water started. You can have a bath tomorrow." So it takes a while because it's a lot of water when you're bucketing it over yourself instead of with a shower. Yeah,
it is. And so when I was in there, I ended up leaving the Tamascal, I think, in worse shape from a cleanliness standpoint than when I went in, mainly because I just didn't know how to take a correct Tamascal bath.
Right.
And two, I was just almost too big for it, to where I came out and I had, mud patches or scrapes from where I was bumping up against the wood and the mud, and came out and I was just drenched in sweat. And I remember the grandma saying, "Está bien? Like, are you okay? Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm great." But
refreshed. Yeah.
It was not refreshing. I'm sure it is if you knew how to do it correctly.
Right. We joke that it is like a yoga spa experience. There is truth to it. It might not be the most refreshing spa, but because of the height, you do have to balance and basically like squat the whole time as you're dressing. Let's say, you do want to emerge clothed,
which is important.
Not in front of the family, exposed.
Yes, so because the exit and entrance, the exit and entrance to the Tamascal is out into the outside common area. So you better be clothed when you exit. You're right. So moving on. We've talked about the kind of the climate and that it is a mountainous region, and you can see on the screen, it's very green. It's very hilly. It's very rocky, and people in the Aldea do a lot of walking, and whether it's walking to a little tienda or store,
or
possibly
church,
school. To the truck stop, micro stop. They're used to a lot of walking.
Very much.
Yeah. And so we've talked about the towns. The towns are where they go to sell maybe what they've grown, or to maybe get medical care if there's not a clinic in their village, which there rarely is. Sometimes there is. The photo on the screen here is a view from the mountain in the village of Chesh. And if you're looking down into the valley, you can see the town of Owakatan. It takes about an hour in a microbus or a truck. There's no tuk-tuks in this case. It's too steep
to get
up and down the mountain. Yeah, so you're going up and down the mountain. It takes about an hour. And so if you want to sell anything, driver,
I've been up in like 30 minutes.
That's true. It does depend on your driver and how adventurous he is.
Yes. And weather, right? Visibility could change because you're going up in the mountains. It could be raining. Yeah, lots of traffic.
Yes. And the video playing right now is, we were riding up the mountain from Owakatan to Chesh in the back of a vegetable truck. And just to kind of give you an idea of what that's like, you're not going typically very fast.
No.
Unless you have a driver like Don's referring to.
Maybe. But that's the best way, because then you can, in a truck, because then you see the great views going up the mountain.
And so once you go from the Aldea into town, and there's some photos on the screen of the town, again, that's typically more like a New Philly or Dover, still smaller. You still don't have the resources that we would have in our towns. You'll have some clinics, you'll have some police presence, but not to the level that we have, or that we're used to. And so this is where people have to go to if there's an issue. If you need the police, you have to go maybe an hour down the mountain and find a ride. So that is why it's difficult for sometimes Guatemalans in their worldview when they come to our area to understand, like, wow, what are all these resources available to us and what do they do? Because in their village, it's usually the church handling it, or the families. Right. If there's a legal issue or a medical issue, you might have an elder in the community that prays over the individual if it's a medical thing, or the pastor kind of handles those disputes. You don't necessarily bring in the police all the time or go to a clinic. So to finish up kind of talking about the Aldea is food. Everyone likes to talk about food.
It's the best topic.
Yeah. So Guatemalan food is not Mexican food.
No, it's not.
It is not like going to Tlaquepaque or El Sands. It is different. and we have some photos up of the different types of foods. And these photos were actually taken by Guatemalan students for a project for Adelante Arts Camp.
They did a great job.
They did. So if you're listening to us, in the top, we have a picture of tortillas. Tortillas are a main staple of every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You always have to have tortillas. And that is made from a masa. So if you're ever in Walmart or a store and you see these little paper bags and it says masa on it, that's what the tortillas are made from.
Yeah.
Then chicken. Guatemalans do love to grill. They love to grill meat of different types. And you also have a couple traditional things. Boshbol.
Our favorite.
Sense the sarcasm.
Not really. Yeah.
Now that's just Don and I's experience. I actually don't like vegetables in general, so boshbol is very difficult for me. But I do know other people who have traveled to Guatemala and they absolutely love boshbol.
They do. Yeah.
But what it is it's basically a certain type of leaf, and it's boiled in a big pot with a bunch of these leaves, and they wrap the leaves around the masa. And so it's kind of and granted, I'm not doing this justice because I'm not a fan, and I've eaten a lot of it when I've been there because it's the respectful thing to do.
For sure.
But it's kind of soggy, and there's usually a couple of different types of sauces that you can dip it in to eat it.
Yeah. I think, it definitely it has different forms too, just like any traditional soup, is made a different way in a different region or area, So the boshbol that we got could have been different from a different area. Right. And I would describe it compare it to like a cabbage soup almost. The leaves are soaked and soggy. And either it would be more like a soup substance or with the maseca or the corn flour dough like substance. I would prefer it that way because then when you do add some like chili seasoning, it definitely enhances it all or makes it better in my opinion. So I've tried it just once or twice and it probably is an acquired taste, you could say.
Yeah. And I think I joke around too whenever I've made my trips and stayed with families, and the Aldeas is, again, I'm kind of a bigger guy from a typical Guatemalan.
Correct, yeah.
And I'm a guest, so their hospitality, so they always want to make sure I have plenty to eat.
Plenty of food, yeah.
And just a quick funny story, a friend of mine, we were visiting a family, and as I mentioned, the families kind of live close together. And so this was actually in a town, but their houses were connected by kind of this outdoor kind of
courtyard
type area. So we were in the one house and the grandma was making us a dinner, and it smelled really good. Didn't really know what it was. So we sat down at their, the wooden table in the kitchen, just kind of waiting for her to give us our food. And while we were waiting, the aunt who lived on the other part of the house came over and was like, "Oh, come." So we followed her, and she sat us down at her table in her kitchen, and she plopped caldo or soup in front of us, among a lot of other things. And I looked at my friend and I said, like, did the grandma like bring her dinner over here? And are we having this? No. Grandma came over as we're eating the caldo and tortillas, and you could tell she was kind of irritated. She was saying something in Ishil to the aunt. They were kind of bickering back and forth. And before I know it, Grandma then brings her dinner in and sets it down in front of my friend and I. And so we had 2 full course meals made by 2 different ladies. Members of the family. And we kind of looked at each other like, we're in for a challenge. This is because we need to finish it. We can't show favoritism over this meal to that meal. No. And it was very good food. There was no boshbol. So we ate it, and it was funny. We ate so much, and we went on a walk through town afterwards, and we had saw this little ice cream stand, and we're like, you know what? We just need something like sweet.
Yeah, something to cleanse the palate.
Yeah, cleanse the palate. So we got this ice cream, and yeah, so it was just one of those experiences of how caring they are and how much they want to take care of you, and how much it doesn't matter if you say no, they're going to set the food in front of you.
Right. And yes, as we said, culturally, we're integrating culture, or talking about culture in everything in all of these episodes, and looking from a different perspective on what is the important part of this meal. It's not to make you overeat and feel uncomfortable. It's to show their hospitality and love and just appreciation of your visit through the gift of delicious food. And
Absolutely.
and when they've been working on it all day long, it would be somewhat offensive to not finish their labor of love, and albeit painful sometimes, but that is the purpose behind it, is to be very generous and hospitable and loving through food.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's the same here. If you ever go on a home visit or invited to a party, you're going to see a similar thing here in the States. Yes. So tamales, that's another big one. Another type of food.
We have to talk about tamales. Yeah. Yes. Very good.
So this is a thing that people are often confused by. So we have tamales and we have chuchitos.
Yeah.
Tamales are what are wrapped typically in your like banana leaf, that green outer layer with the maseca, and then different types of meat in the middle.
Yeah, you could have chicken or
pork,
some type of pork or beef even.
Yes.
I haven't tried any beef yet. Typically pork or chicken would be more
with
common.
Maybe pepper or something like that. And then the chuchito is wrapped in more of a corn husk. And they're typically a little smaller, a little more firm than the tamale, but it has the same contents inside of it. The maseca with either a chicken or a pork.
Yeah. Do you have a preference?
I do. I like the chuchitos.
Oh, interesting. I like the tamales because I think there's more of a distribution of flavor maybe because the maseca is, like you said, more thick in the chuchitos, that it's more of that you're eating. Yeah.
Absolutely. And just like you said with Bosch Bowl, there's so many different types of tamales. Especially like maybe you go to a Mexican restaurant and order tamale. That's not going to be
not at all
your
the
Guatemalan
version. Yeah, right.
And, to kind of wrap up the food here, if you pay attention, you'll see a lot of little kids with little snacks, whether it's in the villages or here in the States. And those are little, if you go into the tiendas, you'll find these native snacks, whether it's candy or like a chip that just kind of brings them back to home, if they go in and get that here. But a lot of kids snacking all the time with these little bags of food.
What about drinks? What is coffee? I would say that is a perception that everyone in Latin America drinks coffee.
Yeah.
Not necessarily true. Not all the time. Yeah.
Well, or it's not necessarily great coffee, because in the case of Guatemala is known for coffee.
It is.
However, it's a main export. So if they're exporting it, typically the coffee that's left for, the indigenous, it's maybe not your top of the line coffee.
Correct. Yeah.
I am not a coffee drinker. I do drink it when it's put in front of me. I'm a tea guy.
Yeah.
But usually when I'm there, it's usually a coffee or an atoll, which is a rice or corn drink. It's white. It's really good. It's almost like drinking an oatmeal
is what
a sweet oatmeal. Yeah, it's very, very good. I am a fan.
Now, I am a big coffee drinker, so that was something I was concerned about in my visits. Not concerned. I think I had the idea that there would be coffee everywhere, and it's not necessarily the case, and maybe not as strongly brewed as I'm used to, but never would have thought I'd like this. But little chili, like powder, or obviously not like straight chili seeds or anything chopped up, but some sort of chili seasoning in a maybe not so impressive blend of coffee, just because that's, what's readily available. Excellent. Definitely would recommend. Yes. Putting a little chili in your coffee if you're in Guatemala. Yeah.
Things you never think of.
Right.
All right. So yeah, that kind of wraps up our discussion about the Aldea. And as we move on through episodes, there'll be little things that pop up to continue to provide a view into what that's like. We look forward to continuing the series. Next episode, we will be talking about Guatemalan history. There's a lot of info in there, pretty important. Really kind of sets up why the Guatemalan community came to Tuscarawas County and gives you a better idea of war life in the Aldea and why things turned out the way that they did. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.